Grant Robertson, question number 6.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Are working people getting a fair share of economic growth when real median household incomes increased by 1% between 2008 and 2015?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I was always going to raise questions about that calculation when real wages have risen by around 12% over that time, and it appears that the member's calculation is probably wrong. Following the right procedure gives a 2.8% real increase on that measure, according to that stats database. However, when you use a more complete and realistic definition of household income, officials advise me median household members should listen. Median household incomes rose by 9% in real terms between 2010 and 2015. The member's calculation simply isn't credible in light of the fact that real wages rose 12% and a comprehensive definition of household income rose by 9% in real terms.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is it correct that the New Zealand Income Survey shows that in contrast to the 1% growth in real median household incomes under his watch, there was a 27% increase from 1999 to 2008, or using his calculation, that would have been the difference between a 2.8% increase and a 25% increase?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, we haven't looked in detail at those figures. I'd simply reiterate what I can tell him today, and that is his calculation of 1% simply misrepresents what's actually happened. Under a comprehensive definition of household income, the median household income rose by 9% in real terms between 2010 and 2015.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Did 44% of New Zealanders get no pay rise at all last year?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, probably, because that's what normally happens. It's pretty standard that somewhere between 45 to 50% of the workforce gets a pay increase in any given year, and that can be simply because, as with many public servants, their pay round only comes up every second or third year.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is lifting real median household incomes by a higher percentage than 2.8% or even 1% a priority for his government?
The Honourable Bill English. Well, Mr Speaker, lifting income certainly is a priority, and by most measures, incomes, by any reasonable measure, incomes have increased. And as I said earlier to the member, his 1% figure, wherever he got it from, simply isn't credible when it's put alongside the measures using comprehensive household income, which has, even using the median, has risen by 9% in real terms between 2010 and 2015. In any case, this Parliament has chosen the ordinary time weekly, after-tax weekly wage as the benchmark for national super, and that has gone up something like 25% in the last 7 or 8 years.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does he think that with some of the highest increases in housing costs in the world in the last year, that is actually contributing to working people feeling that they're working harder than ever, but they're not getting a decent share in prosperity?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think rising housing costs as a proportion of household income is a significant issue. That's why this government has devoted 5 or 6 years to getting the planning, to undoing the damage of 30 years of misguided planning, which has had the effect that the member has said. And that is why the Auckland Unitary Plan is such a big step forward, because for the first time in 30 years, our biggest city has decided to allow growth at a level which in the future may be affordable.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is he really saying to New Zealanders working New Zealanders who've only got a small share of the growth in the economy, that after 8 years, the best he can do is blame somebody else for planning decisions instead of the fact that he's done very little to lift household incomes and control the housing crisis?
The Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr Speaker. What we're saying to them is that this government at least has gone to the trouble of understanding what it is that's putting pressure on household budgets. So those households have benefited on the one hand from low interest rates across the board, which is to some extent a global phenomenon and to some extent to do with New Zealand policy. But at the same time, the capital value of houses has gone up faster than it should have, and that is why we've gone to all the trouble of trying to change the planning system that has restricted the supply of houses, driven up the price of them, and therefore put pressure on low and middle income households. And actually, I think the Labor Party knows that that's correct.
Point of order, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I'd like to draw your attention to Speaker's ruling 47.4 with regards to the interchange between Minister Coleman and Annette King, which Mr Parker drew attention to, and your ruling, sir, on that, alluding to the fact that that sort of interchange would lead to disorder in the House. I actually believe it goes further than that. 47.4, Mr Speaker, says that a member must not accuse another member of making a statement that member knew to be incorrect. And for the minister to say that Mrs King was making stuff up, I believe is covered by this ruling, Mr Speaker. It's akin to saying that the member lied, and I wonder if you might give some consideration to the possibility of asking the minister to withdraw that comment and apologise for it.
Order. All right. The member's talking about 47.4. The member's right. If any minister in responding went so far as Mr Prosser says could have happened and suggested a member is lying, that is completely out of order and would be dealt with severely. Quite often, ministers in answering questions say that they disagree with the member that's asked a question. That would happen very, very frequently. It is not helpful to the order of the House when any minister says that another member is making it up, and I accept that point. Order. I don't need assistance from the Honourable Annette King, though she's very keen to give it. I will look carefully at the Hansards at the end of the day. Question number 7.